Hi, everyone. We're just going to give folks a minute or so to come on in the webinar. Thank you for joining us today. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Technology Tuesdays. My name is Lydia Nimke, and I'm excited to bring you all today's presentation on Image Editing 101. It's my hope that this presentation will give you some tips that you'll find useful when you're editing your photos from this upcoming holiday season or for any reason. You are all muted and have your cameras turned off by default, but please don't let that stop you from asking questions about today's presentation in the Q&A box down below and engaging in the chat. Beth isn't with us today, so please bear with me as I try to make sure I respond to all your questions, and please let me know if you can't hear me or you can't see what's going on my screen or something like that. All right, so let's touch on some of the main concepts we'll be covering today. We'll talk about some of the basics of digital photos. Then we'll talk about some of the different image editing software you can use to edit and manage your photos. Finally, we'll talk about some of the simple adjustments that can turn an okay photo into a great photo. And then we'll talk about fixing some of the most common problems you tend to run into with photography or image editing. And then, of course, we'll be doing some demonstration. Today's demonstration will actually be in Pixlr X, and we'll just go over how to fix those common problems and make those simple adjustments. Of course, image editing is a big topic. There's so many different kinds of software we can use, so I tried to boil it down to the most common and easiest things that pretty much anyone can do to make their photos look a lot better. So for the basics, I added this section to this presentation really late in the game because I realized as I'm talking through, as I do this presentation, that maybe there's some background knowledge that I could put in to make things make a little bit more sense. So excuse me if I fumble. But we're going to be talking a lot. You're going to hear me say this again and again and again. I'm going to be talking about pixels. And every digital photo is made up of pixels, and you'll often see that abbreviated simply as PX. You can think of a pixel as a tiny square that uses a specific color. When you look at any image file on a computer, you're really looking at thousands and thousands of pixels. But because each pixel is so small, you normally won't notice them unless you zoom really, really close in. So when you refer to the height and width of an image, you're actually talking about its dimensions. For example, an image can be 500 pixels wide and 200 pixels high. So you would say that the dimensions are 500px by 200px. And then finally, resolution. So an image's resolution is the amount of detail contained within the image. So the amount of pixels that are contained within the image. The higher the resolution, the more quality the image will have, the more pixels the image has. Resolution is especially important if you're thinking of printing or resizing an image, because you can generally make an image smaller without noticing any difference in the quality of the image. However, if you make an image larger than its original size, you will usually notice a loss in quality. it'll probably look, if you try to make an image larger, it'll probably look blurry or blocky and pixelated. I'm sure you've seen images like this before that have been, made a little bit too big and kind of don't look great as they should. Because digital image files can be very large and take up a lot of hard drive space, a lot of file formats actually use compression to reduce the file size. And there are two main types of file compression. One is lossy, and this type of compression removes some of the information from the image and lowers the overall quality to reduce the file size. So it might reduce, instead of being, for example, if there are 4 pixels in an area that are all of a similar color, they might just replace those 4 pixels with 1 pixel to make it a smaller file size, and therefore lower resolution and lower quality, right? So with lossless image compression, no information is removed from the image, but then the file size is generally not reduced, so they can take up a lot of space. Images that use lossy compression can be saved at different quality levels. The lower the quality, the smaller the file size. So if you're running into an issue where you're trying to send something as an email attachment and it just keeps spitting it back that the file size is too big, you can lower the quality, make a smaller file size, but you're going to potentially lose some information from the image. So when you're working with image editing and photography editing, there are generally 2 recommended file formats. There are more that you can save your images as, but these 2 generally get the job done. And the first of them is the JPEG. This file type is commonly used for photographs, and most digital cameras can save photos in this format by default. JPEG uses a lossy compression, which means it provides a decent level of quality without having that very large file size. Now, a PNG file format, or PNG or PNG, however you want to say it, is commonly used for graphics and illustrations, and it can be used for photographs as well. PNG uses a lossless compression, meaning photographs saved in this file format will usually be of a higher quality than your JPEG images, but the file size will probably be larger. All right, let's jump in to our first subject and talk about some image editing software. So anything you would use on your computer to make changes to an image is image editing software, and they range from very simple ones to very complex ones. If you need to make simple adjustments to an image like cropping, resizing, and rotating, there are tons of free applications that are available to you. This includes not only built-in software that comes on your computer or other device, it also includes third-party software that you can download for your specific purposes. And we'll talk about them. Built-in software options are they're available across the board for any device you may have. Windows, for example, comes stock with Microsoft Paint and Microsoft Photos. Machines that run the Mac operating systems come with Preview and Apple Photos. Your iOS devices come with the Photos app that actually has a lot of great editing tools in it itself. And same with Android, having Google Photos and access to the gallery that come with their own editing tools. Now, our third-party softwares, there are so many of them that you can use both on your computer or on your mobile device. Some are free, others are paid. One example is Pixlr, which is a free editor that runs just in your web browser, so there's nothing to download. For quick edits, Pixlr has a basic version called Pixlr X, which is also available as a mobile app. And we'll actually be using Pixlr X throughout this demonstration to show the various editing tasks we'll go over. I, picked this one out just because it's free. It's available in your browser. You don't have to download anything. And it's not dependent on your operating system. And in running through it, it works just like most other image editing software I have used in the past. Along with that, there are other free apps that you can use to edit images, like Instagram. They have a full suite of image editing things you can do, from filters, cropping, resizing, the whole gambit. There is also Visco and Photoshop Express. Now, most mobile applications don't include as many features as you'd find in a desktop application, of course, but they do make it easy to make basic edits on the go. And, in today's world, a lot of the photos that are taken, a lot of the images that we create are on our phones, so we're out and about, and that may just be a convenience factor that you would enjoy. And finally, while you may not realize it, some programs in the Microsoft Office suite, like Word, PowerPoint, and Microsoft Publisher, include image editing tools that are pretty substantial. And they are especially helpful if you want to make simple adjustments to an image in a document or a presentation. I use Microsoft's image editing tools all the time whenever I'm putting an image in one of these PowerPoints that you see. Now, going from the more simple side of things to the more complex, if you need additional editing tools, you may find yourself in need of a more advanced image editing software. These are just a few of the available options. I'm sure you can find something specifically tailored to your need and maybe get a free trial of it, just so you can kind of see how it works before you fully commit to, purchasing it. So probably the one with the biggest name in image editing is Adobe Photoshop. It's available for both Windows and Mac devices. And Photoshop is an incredibly powerful application that is used by professional photographers and designers. It's also very expensive. So unless you're planning to edit photos professionally, or you want all of Adobe Creative Suite for other creative pursuits, you probably want to consider getting one of the more affordable or free options that are listed further down. For example, Photoshop Elements, which is commonly referred to as Photoshop Lite. It gives you access to some of the most popular features of the full version of Photoshop, but usually costs around $100. While some advanced Photoshop users could get frustrated because of the limitations, Photoshop Elements is definitely a good option for beginner to intermediate users. Now, Pixelmator is only available for the Mac, and Pixelmator Pro includes many of the advanced features found in Photoshop and usually costs around $50. GIMP was designed as an open source alternative to Photoshop, meaning that it's free to use on both Windows and Mac. While it's a very powerful application and it has a lot of features, it can be kind of confusing and difficult to use, especially if you aren't familiar with other image editing software. If you just jumped right into that one, it might be a little confusing. And then finally, there is the Pixlr editor. So like Pixlr X, the full Pixlr editor is a free application that runs in your web browser, and it includes a lot of those advanced features, and I found it pretty similar to Photoshop. And then I just want to touch briefly on photo management software to kind of collect, store, and archive your photos. Um, Adobe, Photoshop, Lightroom, Microsoft Photos, and Apple Photos. These all feature organizational tools like the ability to tag photos and organize them into folders. And they make it very easy to view and manage a lot of photos. If you have, thousands and thousands of folders that are just, in a file on your computer and you kind of want to start working with them a little bit more, chances are, if they're on your computer, you already have Microsoft Photos or Apple Photos available to you. And they conveniently include some of the more simple editing tools, cropping, rotating. They have those available for you within these photo management software. All right, let's go ahead and talk about making some simple adjustments. Image editing is all about adjusting your images to make them look better. So we'll cover some of the more basic ones along with some of the common problems to watch out for when making these changes. So at the core, probably everyone has a need to do some cropping, resizing, and rotating. So when you're cropping, you want to remove parts of an image. So you crop it. You can think of cropping as using a pair of scissors to cut out the parts of the image you don't want. When you're resizing, you want to make an image smaller or larger, you'll be able to do that. However, like we mentioned earlier, you just want to keep in mind that making an image too much larger than its original size generally isn't a good thing for how the image actually looks. And then rotating, very simple. If you want to change the orientation of an image from a landscape image to a portrait image, for say, you can rotate it to the left or right. So here are a few important things I'd encourage you all to keep in mind as you start working with editing your images. The first is to keep your originals. If you're planning to make even basic changes, even something as basic as cropping or rotating or anything like that, you should keep an original unedited version of the file. I recommend just making a habit of doing this whenever you're working with image files until you have the final version you're ready to keep. This way, if anything happens, anything weird that you can't account for, you can't undo, you'll always be able to go back to the original version. That's just a best practice. One of the first things I learned in photography class was to never be working on your only copy of something. Then check the zoom level. So when you're editing an image on a computer, you'll usually be viewing it at less than 100% of its full size. And this is because most modern digital cameras, including the one we keep in our pocket, take large, high-resolution images. And these images are so large, in fact, that most computer screens can't display all the pixels in the image at once. And this is a good thing because it means you'll have extra detail to work with as you edit the image. Always better to have more pixels than less pixels, right? So next, higher resolution equals more detail. So whenever you crop or resize an image, you're also removing pixels from that image. So better to have, the extra detail to work with, right? So whenever you're taking pixels away, it gives you a little bit less flexibility. For example, if you wanted to print the photo, having the extra pixels would help to make the photo look as sharp as possible. Because looking at an image on a screen, such as your computer screen, your phone screen, is different than looking at it printed on paper. Photo prints generally have a much higher resolution than anything we're going to see on a screen, so you want to make sure you have as many pixels as possible if you're planning to print the image out. And then the last tip is to experiment. You have the original version saved, tucked away safe somewhere on your device. So, you know, do whatever you think would make your image look better. There's no perfect formula for editing images. As long as you have that original file, try out different adjustments to find out what works for the image. You might be surprised and learn that changing the temperature to cool on all of your beach photos makes them look super cool. You know, you never know, so I'd encourage you to experiment. And if you change your mind later, you just go back to the original version. All right, so a little bit more in depth about cropping images. There will often be times when an image has a lot of extra space or just content you'd like to remove. Maybe there's a photo of your family and there's a person in the background who, is pulling a weird face, so you want to crop them out. You can use cropping to change the composition as well as the subject of the image. I'm going to show you some examples on the next page of where I do just that. And you can also use cropping to change the image orientation again. So even if you don't want to, you're not rotating the image, you can crop the image to change it from a landscape to a portrait and vice versa. So let's take a look here. So in this original image we have on the left, if this whole grayed out area was in our photo, it's going to be a lot of gray. It might be a beautiful image, but maybe you want to focus in on the butterfly itself. Maybe this butterfly is rare and you want to showcase that you caught a photo of it. You can crop this part out so your final image just is mostly the butterfly. We can also use cropping to change an image from landscape to portrait. So if this image was its original size, we see it's going long ways, right? But if we completely change the image by, cropping out several of the lanterns, cropping out this part of the room, we can change it into a portrait orientation like this cropped image on the right here. All right, so when you're resizing images, you may want to do this for a wide variety of reasons. Digital images can be displayed at a wide variety of sizes. So you may not need to resize them all the time, but it's probably the simplest way to reduce the file size, which can be super helpful if you want to send the image as an email attachment or upload it to, any of the platforms. Sometimes they just won't accept files that are, quite large. Again, just one more tip. Remember, you should avoid making images larger than their original size. You should also try to preserve the aspect ratio. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on this slide. When resizing an image, it's important to make sure the new version uses the same proportions or aspect ratio as the original. For example, take a look at this image here. This is an image of our central library in downtown Milwaukee. If you want to resize this image while maintaining the same aspect ratio, you'll need to change both the height and the width, not just one or the other. Most image editing programs can do this automatically when you elect to resize the image. However, if you just try and guess which proportions to use, or you use those sizing handles that pop up along the side, it's very easy for an image to become distorted and look all sorts of wonky. It can look too wide, too narrow, squished. Take a look at this image, for example. Very squished. While it may not always be this obvious. This example illustrates why it's important to preserve the original aspect ratio when resizing an image. There are a few easy ways to make sure that the resized image will use the same aspect ratio as the original. Most image editing applications will give you the option to preserve the aspect ratio, and it's usually called, in Pixlr X, it's called constrained proportions, and in other applications, it may be called something like keep proportions or maintain aspect ratio. In some programs like Photoshop, it's represented by a lock icon. Make sure this option is turned on before resizing your image. Once you reach that step, you should only need to adjust the height or the width, and the other dimension will be adjusted automatically. If you're using the sizing handles to resize an image, so those things that pop up in the corners and along the side, where you can just kind of like drag and resize the image, try to use the corner handle instead of the side handle, because that'll keep you kind of square. And then finally, if you need to fit an image to a new aspect ratio, for example, if you need to print a 4:6 for this frame that you would like to fill with this image you took, it's probably, and your original image is square, it's probably best to crop the image to the new aspect ratio instead of trying to stretch it out to fit that. Again, that's going to result in distortion and look a little weird depending on how far you stretch it. Now, sometimes an image may be rotated the wrong way. And this can happen if the camera was turned on its side when taking the original image. And it's super easy to fix this just by rotating the image. You'll just choose the desired rotate direction. Usually it's rotate left or rotate right. And, click that button until it shows up the right way up. All right. Now we're actually going to hop into Pixlr. So I'm going to go ahead and open my browser here. So you're going to go into Pixlr just by typing pixlr.com into your web browser. Like I mentioned, Pixlr E is the more advanced version, whereas Pixlr X is the, quick and easy version. We're going to go into Pixlr X today. I'm going to turn off my camera to make sure you all can see the whole screen here. You can totally make an account on this website if you're going to be editing a lot of photos, but you don't need to, actually, which I'm always pleasantly refreshed and surprised when places don't want my email address. So all you have to do is upload the image you want to edit by pushing this open image button right in the middle of the page. And then we'll pick the image we want to kind of work on. So I'm going to pick this image of a squirrel I have here. So it's asking me if I want to pre-resize the image because the image, again, is very large. It's 4,600 pixels by 3,000 pixels. And that would be a lot to work on. So I'm just going to allow it to make it into an HD image, which is 1920 by 1280. And I'll click apply. And now we're in the editor. So the tools for using this editor are pretty simple. We have our home button, and then along the left-hand side, we have all our options for edits. I really like Pixlr because you don't have to remember what any of these icons mean. Whenever you hover over them, loud and in blue and white, it tells you what the icon does. So I really appreciate that. And they're all along the left here. You don't have to look multiple places for them. There's not even a top menu in this. So that is great. Down at the bottom, we have our preferences. Over towards the right of the bottom, we have our undo and redo buttons. Once we start making changes, you'll be able to go back and you'll be able to redo the things you've done. We also have our close button and our save button. Over on the right here, we have our ability to zoom in and zoom out. That is one way you can do it. We also have our layers. So down at the bottom, if we wanted to add another layer, this is where we could add another image to this project if we wanted to. If we wanted a text overlay or a frame, we could add those sorts of additional layers there. So let's go ahead and crop this image down. There's a lot of green tree and it's quite clear that our subject is the squirrel. So we could go ahead and crop this image down by pressing on this crop and rotate button here. And if you'll notice, I'm going to make the image just a little smaller. If you'll notice, now we have those drag handles, right? We're not resizing, we're just getting rid of some of the photo that we don't want to have anymore. So we can crop it down by dragging wherever we think is appropriate, or we could use some of the presets down at the bottom. So once you open the crop menu, you'll see this sub menu called Select Aspect. And when we click on that, we can see the presets at the very bottom. So right now it's set to a 1:1, so a square image, but we could change that to a 4:3 image or, you know, a 4:5. These are all kind of relative ratios of images. And there are a lot of them for specific social medias. So Instagram has its own image dimensions that it uses. Facebook has its own image dimensions that it uses for the profile pictures and for the cover photos and so on. So if you're using it for a specific purpose, chances are there's a preset size in here that you could utilize instead of having to, you know, do the guesswork yourself. So I'm just going to keep mine to a 1:1 square. And I think I'm happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply down here at the bottom. And that's confirmed my cropping selection. And that is what our image looks like now. So if it turns out I cropped the wrong part of the photo out, I could always push undo and I'm back to where I started. No big deal. But I'm going to leave the image as we've cropped it. And I'm going to go back in that same menu. And perhaps we want the squirrel to look like he's crawling up instead of crawling down. We're going to use the rotate and flip section here to rotate him to the left. You can also flip images around. However you choose. And then again, we're going to click apply at the bottom and the image is set as having been rotated. So to resize an image, because this image is still relatively large at 1280 by 1280p, we're going to go to the layout and template section and click resize image. Now here you'll see the width and the height are listed. And we see this constrained proportion section that I was talking about. That is already turned on for us. So if we want to resize the image, we're going to resize it to be smaller. How about we resize it to 925 pixels by 925 pixels? You see that height section already changed. It changes the same if I just edit the height instead of the width. And again, we're going to click apply. And now the image is significantly smaller, even though we're still viewing it at 60%. Okay. So those are the simple adjustments that, are very easy to kind of get the hang of when you're doing them. And I'm sure everyone has some images that could be cropped or rotated or resized. Let's jump back into our presentation and talk about some of the common problems that we may encounter. Images that come straight from a digital camera are not always perfect. And as you start to gain more experience with image editing, you may notice some recurring problems that you'll want to fix. For example, some images may be too bright, others may be too dark or blurry, and there are many corrections that you can make to kind of transform your images to make them look dramatically better. Some of the corrections that we'll cover in some depth on the upcoming slides and in the demo include brightness and contrast. So if an image is too bright or too dark, you can adjust that with an image editor. Color. If the colors in an image are muted or dull, you can use a variety of color correction tools, including saturation. Sharpness. So if an image is blurry or less clear than you'd like it to be, you can sharpen it up after the fact. So whenever an image looks too bright or too dark, it may be caused by several factors, including the lighting where the photo was taken and camera settings, but you can offset this in the editing phase by adjusting the brightness and contrast of the image. So when you adjust the brightness, you're changing the overall level of light and dark in the image. If you find an image is too dark and you can't really see what details are in the image itself, you can try increasing the brightness, as in this example here. However, increasing the brightness for a very dark image can lead to a lot of image noise or graininess. So for example, in this image here, it's very dark, but it's a beautiful photo of some beautiful bird. When we increase the brightness, we notice that the background looks kind of rough and kind of grainy. I don't know if you all can see that. I can try and zoom in here. So we can see that the image looks kind of rough and grainy, whereas it was smoother, albeit very dark, in the original image. We don't necessarily want to increase the brightness enough that we see all of that noise back there, but there are some ways to go about reducing the noise. Moving on to contrast. When you increase the contrast, you're making the difference between the light and the dark areas of the image more noticeable. In other words, you're making the dark parts darker and the light parts lighter. In the example here, notice how the sky at the top is a lot lighter in the edited version, but the trees and the rocks become a lot darker. Increasing contrast too much can lead to a loss in image detail, and it usually increases the saturation, which, could be good or could make things look a little odd. We're talking about saturation on this next slide. which is kind of your fix for when colors appear to be somewhat dull or muted. You can kind of compensate for that by increasing the saturation. That'll make the colors look richer and more vivid. So for example, in this image, if you give it a little bit more saturation, it looks, all the pinks look pinker, all the yellows look more yellow, and the greens are so much greenier. Like sometimes that's exactly what you want to do, especially, in floral photos. On the other hand, you can reduce saturation to make the colors look less vivid. So if you remove the saturation completely, it'll produce a black and white or a grayscale image. I would warn against increasing the saturation too much because this can make the colors look unnatural, like almost like a highlighter, which is not something we usually want in realistic photos. But sometimes it's an artistic effect and that's what you're going for. There are many other ways to adjust the color in an image. Color correction tools are going to vary pretty greatly depending on the image editing application you're in. But some of the common ones you're likely to see are vibrance. And this is a tool that lets you boost the saturation for the parts of the image that are less colorful without oversaturating the parts that are already colorful, which helps prevent those weird, uncanny type colors from coming in. Temperature adjusts how warm or cool colors in the image appear. In general, a warmer temperature will look more red or orange in an image, while a cooler temperature will look more blue. And then there are filters. A lot of apps, like Instagram, for example, have predefined combinations of color adjustments that you can quickly apply, like with the press of a button, to create interesting effects. For example, they can make your photos look like they were taken with a vintage camera, or you can add sepia tones, things like that. So whenever an image is not as clear as you'd like it to be, sharpening can help make that image look crisp by enhancing the edges of the objects in the image. However, adding too much sharpness, as with all things, can actually make the image look worse or lead to a loss in image detail. For example, as you can see, the right amount of sharpness makes the photo look very crisp, very, very beautiful. It's easy to see the edges of the bird's feathers, but adding too much sharpness causes the edges to look really exaggerated, and there's like highlights where there shouldn't be highlights, and kind of like it doesn't even look like a real bird anymore at this point. You may have also noticed that the background in the over-sharpened image has a little bit more noise than the regularly sharpened image or the original. I'm going to zoom in again so I can show you all if you can see. So a lot more of those like little dots, those little image noise in the background than in this one. Other common problems you may run into, I've mentioned image noise a lot, and that will happen as you get, into editing photos. It will just happen. You'll notice it as you find it. Red eye removal is a pretty common one, which is pretty much when, the flash on the camera causes the subject's eyes to look red. And then there are also touch-up tools. So whenever there is a blemish or on your subject's skin, or there's someone in the photo you don't want to be in the photo, but you don't want to necessarily crop them out, there are ways to kind of handle that with touch-up tools. but Pixlr X does not have options to do these things because it's a basic photo editing software. However, if you want to do red eye removal or image noise removal, you can do that in the similarly free, similarly nothing to download Pixlr editor. All right. And we're going to go into our last demonstration to show you how to make some of these, fix some of these problems. If there are any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. All right, so we're back in with our squirrel. And it is a pretty dark photo. So I would want to go in and brighten it up a little bit, right? So I'm going to go down to the adjust and filter icon, push that button to bring up the adjust menu. So there are plenty of options for you to adjust and play with. We're gonna go down to light first, actually. And this is where brightness and contrast, along with exposure, white colors, black colors, highlights, and shadows lives. As you adjust the brightness with this slider, and you can also adjust it by typing in a number if you have a specific number you're trying to, make it. But usually I just suggest adjusting with the slider. And as you do that adjustment, you can see the image over on the right here change with, the adjustments you've made. So it's getting bright, and that's as bright as the software we have now can make it. You can also make it darker. And this is as dark as Pixlr can make it. Somewhere in the middle is good for me. Same thing with contrast. You're going to see the changes reflected instantly in the image. So we'll leave that somewhere around there. That looks good for me. And why don't we go in and adjust the saturation as well? Saturation is under the color umbrella here, along with vibrance, temperature, tint, and hue. So we'll go ahead and adjust the saturation up a little bit so we can see what that looks like. And over on the edge there might be considered a little oversaturated. The squirrel looks orange more or less, so I probably wouldn't leave it there. And then desaturated, as you can see, is a black and white photo. So somewhere in the middle, probably good for this too. All right. So we've changed our light and we've edited our color, and Pixlr is nice in that it gives you like a blue highlight near the boxes that you've changed. So if something starts looking a little off and you want to go back, ooh, it's actually, not right enough. I want to pump up that brightness a little bit more. You can go back and know that you changed the setting there. And then if we wanted to sharpen this image, it is nicely under the details portion. And we can just pump up that sharpness a little. Now I'm going to zoom in pretty close here so you all can notice the changes that are happening as I sharpen this image. So looking at the squirrel's back, if we sharpen the image, we're going to see like the individual hairs start to come out. And the more and more we sharpen it, now it's starting to get a little weird looking, right? I'll show you that at 100% so you can see again. I'm going to go down. Now it just looks like fur on the squirrel's back. But as we sharpen it, it gets sharper and sharper until it starts to not even look like fur to me. So you want to be careful with that sharpen tool, but it is very cool and very useful, especially if you have photos of maybe a moving subject or a pet or a kid that's not necessarily going to sit still for you to take an actual photo of them. It's nice to be able to sharpen things up a little bit. And then you also have your ability to, change all of these other features. Just because I'm not talking about them doesn't mean I don't think they're valuable or that you should use them. It's just, a lot to go through if I were to talk about each and every one of them. We also have the scene, which allows you to do things like change the surrounding light in the photo, if that makes sense. So creating a vignette and things of that nature, as well as toning, giving things a certain highlight color or low light color. And fill, there's no fill in this photo. But you could add that in if you chose to. So once we've made all our edits, we go ahead and hit apply, and they are saved to our photo. Let's go ahead and, okay, we have a question from Gail who asks, how about if you want to add text to your photo, would it change the size? It would probably change the size, probably not very much, but it would probably make the size of the photo a little bit more. Let's go ahead and actually add some text to our photo, just so we can kind of see what that looks like. If anyone saw the Canva Tech Tuesdays, it's gonna work pretty similarly to that. Let's see. Where it gets overlaid onto the image. And let's see, transform, happy thoughts. So adding text does get a little bit more complicated in that we have to be on the actual layer itself to edit it. So I'm just going into the left side to click on the layer I want to edit. So I changed happy to miss, and I'm gonna change thoughts to you. So it's a little squirrel guy saying miss you. And then when I close that, that's what our new image looks like. And the image will probably be a little bit bigger. That's a great question. Does anyone else have any questions about Pixlr? Any other, feature you saw that I didn't go over that you'd want me to? If not, the last thing I'll show you in Pixlr X is how to get your photo out of here, right? Because generally you want to do more with your photo than just leave it in Pixlr. So down at the bottom, you'll see the blue save button, and you're going to hit that. You can name your file, whatever is appropriate to you, or, we already have a photo on our computer called Squirrel Full Size. So maybe you want to name it Squirrel Full Size Edited, just so you know which one you've edited already. You can save it in any of these file types, but I recommend sticking with either the JPEG or the PNG. And you can adjust the quality you save it as. So maybe, I don't need a high quality image of this. If this is just a lark, if this is just, I'm making a meme to send to a friend because I miss them, it doesn't need to be the highest quality image. However, if I'm going to print this on a card and send it to my grandma, it does need to be a very high quality image because printed images need a higher resolution than digital ones. So depends for the purpose. We can just toggle this down to kind of get it to the file size, which we're going to see right there that we want. And if we want the highest resolution, the best quality, it's going to be about 1.1 megabits. So you can kind of adjust that for what you need it to be, for the requirement that you need it to be, if you're uploading or sending an email attachment or whatever the case may be. And then you'll just hit download. And then as you see at the bottom of my screen, our download popped up here. And what's opened in Microsoft Photos is my Miss You squirrel. So that is pretty easy to get the photo out of Pixlr as well. Let's hop back into our presentation here. If there are no more questions, or if as you're playing around in Pixlr or whatever your image editing software of choice is, I'm available via email. My email is lcnimke@milwaukee.gov. Feel free to reach out. You will also be receiving a follow-up email from me with a link to a recording of today's presentation. Probably won't get it until Saturday, but you will all receive that. And I also this week have a instructional, guide to doing the various steps I went through in Pixlr. So hopefully that you'll find that helpful. Next week, we're going back into the Google Tools series to talk about Google Drive again, specifically Google Slides and Google Forms. So I hope some of you will join us for that. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful holiday. And we'll hopefully see you next week. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.